For the first 100 episodes, no sponsors. So what I actually did, I was an affiliate for all these companies that I love and promote. I have a list of people I want to interview, people that I admire, I've studied, and maybe they have a big following and they have some great work I want to introduce to my audience. And there's multiple ways that I have reached out to them.
Monetizing a video podcast, though, for you, what are the different monetization streams?
There's a lot of ways.
But what have you learned about interviewing, about preparation, about asking questions now that you're over 700 episodes? If you're thinking about starting a video podcast, if you already have a podcast that you want to grow, and you're thinking about all of the details, how do I interview guests? What about the technology? What about workflows? Whether you're brand new and you have limited gear or you want to advance into building a full-on empire, you're going to want to stick around to the end of today's episode because we're going to be talking about all things video podcasting. My guest today is Ben Azadi. He's the founder of Keto Camp. He's on a mission to educate 1 billion people on the planet. And his YouTube channel and podcast is designed to be the ultimate resource for intermittent fasting, keto diet, performance, and longevity. He's also an author and a speaker and well respected. But when it comes to his social influence, he's got a YouTube channel, over 200,000 subscribers, over 18 million views. And then his audio podcast, the Keto Camp podcast with Ben Azadi, has had 724 episodes. And so there's going to be a lot of juicy nuggets in this episode. And I am grateful to have my friend back on the Think Media podcast. Ben, how's it going?
Outstanding, Sean. Grateful to be with you today.
So let's first of all talk a little bit about the vision, and then I want to get into the nitty gritty. You have incredible guests. How do you reach out to them? What's your workflow for getting your show done? What did it look like in the early days? What does it look like today? But for those that are just meeting you, it really starts with the why. What's your vision for putting in the work to do all the incredible content that you're doing?
Yeah, you're right. It does start with a why. When you have a why, then you commit to it versus just being interested in it. So for me, the why is to educate people that are going through challenges with their life when it comes to health, symptoms, disease, diabetes, etc. These are lifestyle diseases and symptoms that are preventable and reversible. And I have a big issue with big pharma and big food and big gov as it relates to this conversation here. So my goal is to strip the power away from big pharma and give it back to at least 1 billion people. That's the lifetime mission. So I have a strong why, and that why is what pushes me forward. It's this worthy ideal that I'm constantly pursuing. And there is a big difference between just being interested in something like that and being committed. If I was just interested in that, I'd do it until it became inconvenient, and then it would be easy to just justify why I should give up. But since I'm committed, I figure it out, and I accept nothing except results. And I'm committed to actually getting the message out there. So that is the goal, to be proactive and help people become geniuses. Like Einstein said, intellectuals solve problems, geniuses actually prevent them. And that's what I want for the world. I want to change their lifestyle and their mindset. And that is the why.
You inspire me. And our mission is to help purpose-driven people really change the world with video. And you're doing that. So you're such a friend of the show and love your heart. I'm curious the history. Tell me first, the Keto Camp podcast with Ben Azadi, 724 episodes in. When did it start? What was your first upload? And was that audio only back in those days?
Yeah. I can't believe we're that many episodes in. It's pretty deep. We started our first episode July of 2019. July of 2019 was episode 1. Only audio, done on Zoom. And I figured if I'm doing the Zoom recordings, and this was really early on, I think like within the first 10 episodes, I was thinking if I'm already doing the video recordings, might as well post the Zooms too. So really early on, I just started posting the Zooms. No edits, just a straight up Zoom recording. Of course, Zoom is pros and cons. It's easy to use. People know how to use Zoom, but you don't get the best quality audio and video. So that's how it started. And eventually there's been different steps that we'll talk about, but started off with Zoom recordings.
I want to kind of stay there because your show is pretty sophisticated today. And I think for listeners, most of us can't relate either to the financial or the logistical or the operations. Like there's a lot to onboard to do what some video podcasts look like today. But your first episode was Zoom only. And then you said in short order, because you were recording the video, that you realized you could upload that. No edits. You would start, you uploaded the episode, So you mean you'd turn it off, and then you just upload that recording, throw a thumbnail on there, throw a title on there. In 2019, did you have help yet with YouTube channel management, or was that just kind of, you're like, I can start a podcast, I'm going to throw it up there? And then did you upload it to like Lipsyn or something in regards to audio? What was the workflow like day one for like the simplest video podcasting formula?
I had a sound editor, a sound engineer for the podcast right before we even recorded the first episode, but I did not have a YouTube editor or anybody doing my YouTube at that time. So it was me uploading it, Canva thumbnail. Lipsyn is what I used to use, and I still actually use Lipsyn. So it would be hosted on Lipsyn, and that would distribute it to all the other audio platforms, but not YouTube. That would be me manually going into YouTube and uploading it. So I did not have any YouTube help at that moment.
I love this. So, and then that audio editor, that's not like a full-time staff salary with healthcare, or was it like a agency or something? Like, do you remember kind of what that cost or where you found that person?
Still working with him to this day. He's helped me out with all those 700 plus episodes. His name's Ian. He's great. He's based out of Canada. $40 an episode, and it's independent contractor. It's just based off of how many episodes I put out. $40 I should say per episode. If the episode is an hour, sometimes we go longer. So $40 an hour.
That's amazing. Okay, so that right there, listeners, is something that I think I would encourage everybody. We always say punch fear in the face, punch perfectionism in the face, and press record. You found a guest. I'm assuming you started with interviews from day one.
Yeah, the first guest was my mentor, Dr. Pampa, who's easy to ask him to come on my podcast because I knew him. But I also reached out to people I didn't know before I even had an episode, and they said yes, which was a surprise to me.
And so, audio editor polishes it up, gives you that file, you upload it to Lipsyn. There are other tools, and we'll link some of those up in the show notes. We use Buzzsprout, and there could be different pros and cons to others, but that then makes it relatively easy to title it, add a description, and then it's going to go to Spotify, it's going to go over to Apple, and then you have that leverage. And so you got to upload it to YouTube, fill out the description, title, thumbnail, but boom, now a podcast is started, and a video podcast leveraging Zoom. These days, we use tools like StreamYard or Riverside, which can give you a lot higher quality. And but start before you're ready. What are some of the lessons? And try to put yourself back there. Like, did you have interviewing experience? Were you nervous? What was kind of your mindset compared to your confidence level today over 700 episodes versus day one, maybe imposter syndrome, or had you already dealt with some of those things?
Definitely had all that. Imposter syndrome is still something that as I continue to grow and expand and put myself in uncomfortable situations, that still comes up, and I'm working on that and getting better and better. And I think that's not a problem. It's actually a good thing, at least for me. In the beginning, I did not have any interview experience. I felt like I look back at those interviews and I listen to it and I kind of cringe a little bit, but I'm learning. You always say, Sean, you're painting the airplane as it flies through the sky, right? It's like I'm figuring it out as I go. And I got better and better, of course. But yeah, I was nervous. I wasn't sure if I wanted to put my thoughts into the conversation. Like if I had something to say that I think would add value to what the guest just said, I didn't have the confidence to maybe add that value, or I thought it was stupid. Or I had all these thoughts rolling through my head. But eventually, as you go through it, I always say the frequency creates that genius. You start to get better and better the more you do it. And then I got really fascinated with interviewing, and I started to fall in love with these podcasts, and we'll talk more about the benefits of podcasting. So then I started studying other people out there that I admire who are podcasters and what I value about them. And I started to extract some of the things they did that I felt like I could model as well. So guys like Howard Stern, and I don't like everything that Howard Stern does, but I feel like sometimes he could do a really good job kind of extracting really good things from people. Sean Croxton, who has a podcast called Quote of the Day podcast, which is a really popular podcast, but he was one of the first original health podcasters with a podcast called Underground Wellness. He's one of the best interviewers too, so I started studying him. So started modeling these people that were had a lot of podcasts and a lot of skin in the game, and I started to kind of pick up some of the things they were doing, and then eventually I got better and better at it.
That's amazing. So now, in a nutshell, describe the workflow of who is involved in your show today
with the video podcast. Well, it is a video podcast now. At least the majority of them are. There are still some exceptions we're making for virtual, and we use Squadcast for that, which is very similar to what we're using here with Riverside. But I would say 90% of all our podcasts now are in person. And I want to get to a point where it's only 100%. So the workflow is have a list of people I want to interview, people that I admire, I've studied, and maybe they have a big following and they have some great work I want to introduce to my audience. And there's multiple ways that I have reached out to them. Sometimes it's as simple as hitting them up in the DMs on Instagram and saying, been following your work, here's what I do, I'd love to interview you here in Miami. And I understand that being in Miami is an easier ask than saying, I don't know, like Detroit or something. But I say I have a person podcast studio in Miami. I'd love to interview you. That's one way. Sometimes they respond, sometimes they don't. So then we send out, my assistant will send out an email and share a little bit about what we have going on with the podcast and our stats and invite them to come to Miami to do a podcast. Once they agree, like this is the same thing with you, Sean. You were here a few months ago for Patrick Bet-David's Vault event, right? So it was easy to kind of get you to come to the studio because you're already here for an event. A lot of people are coming to Miami, to Vegas or big cities. So they show up like you showed up, and I have 3 cameras set up here. I have one which is going to be directly on the guest. I have one that's going to be directly on me, and then I have one in the middle for both of us. And there are Sony DSLRs, A6600s. We hit record on all 3, and then I have the Rodecaster Pro here. And am I going too deep here? Is that what you want?
This is perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, we're loving it.
Okay, cool. So I have the Rodecaster Pro with the Shure MB7 mic. I have 2 Shure MB7 mics, and then that has an attachment on the table in between the 2 chairs with the books behind us. And we hit record on the GarageBand, which is what we use for the Rodecaster. And then we're good to go. Like the SD cards are rolling. The Rodecaster is rolling. Now, when you came to my studio, I had somebody in-house, Brian, who was helping me set everything up. And I realized that I actually didn't need him. I was paying him $150 to be there for an hour, but I could simply just position it myself, which takes 5 minutes. I'd save that money. So I ended up doing that. But you could always have somebody there if you want to, just to make sure things go smoothly. So yeah, we hit record, and then we have the conversation, and then now we have all this content. And I could share what happens after that if you want.
Yeah, we can later talk about the power of just chopping it up and distributing it. I am curious, do you ever do solo rounds?
For my podcast?
Yeah.
I do, and I have not done as many as I used to.
Okay, so when was your first solo round? I know now we're kind of jumping back, but you started using Zoom. Did you also, episode maybe 20 or 45, just talk straight to camera and upload a podcast, or any thoughts between doing some solo rounds?
I did actually, I believe episode 2 was a solo episode, but it wasn't video. It was only audio. It wasn't probably until I got over like 30 episodes where I thought, hey, if I'm sitting there recording the audio, might as well turn on the video. And then eventually I started doing more of those. But yeah, in the beginning, I started doing the solos.
Amazing. And what's like the schedule of your podcast now? Are you trying to do 1 a week?
We're actually doing 4 a week, and we're a little creative with it. So every Monday and Friday is a brand new release, episode we have not aired before. Wednesday and Saturday is a re-release. It's an episode from at least 8 months ago. It's between 8 and 24 months ago that we had vetted that we felt like was a really good episode, and we want to re-release it as a new episode. So we're getting out 4. We're being creative with it. And the cool thing about doing it that way, and we're saying in the description, this episode originally aired on this certain date. But the cool thing about that is that we have podcast sponsors. And we could talk more about that if you want, because it's been a big part of the success of the podcast. But there's only so many ads you could put in your podcast before the user starts to feel like this guy just wants to get paid for ads. And I don't want to be one of those podcasts. So I have a lot of companies that want to sponsor, but I don't have enough room. I don't want to just have all this ads on my podcast. So with getting creative here with the Wednesday and Saturday re-releases, we could remove the old sponsors on that previous episode and then insert more sponsors for the new one. So that's a great way to get out some more sponsors and get some income as well. And then also just get episodes out there. And most people are not going to remember. And if they do, I think you always say this, Sean, you would say to them, thank you so much for being such a loyal follower. I appreciate that. Yeah,
that's amazing. So I think that, especially once you build up a body of work, you have this opportunity to maybe re-release and repurpose. Are you repackaging, meaning do you sometimes freshen the title up or market in any way as a re-release, or is it kind of just a new upload, the exact same as it was before with a new show number or something? What's the difference?
We repackage the whole thing. The title is changed. The episode number is changed. We also go into it, or my team does, and listens to it. And any reference that is outdated, we'll edit that out. So sometimes we'll reference an upcoming event or something that already expired, we would just edit that out, and then we'd insert the new ads, and then it's a new re-release.
That's an incredible tip that's more advanced for creators that are further in their career. I think if you're just starting out, you don't have the body of work. But as time goes by, we actually had a Think Media podcast meeting today about looking back over 4 years and looking back over episodes that certainly people don't know about, or maybe they weren't packaged the best the first time, or they just were packaged one way. It made it interesting to some people. And yeah, just this opportunity to redo it, the fact to monetize more in the sense of now you could add different sponsors to it. But that's a genius tip of maybe there's a whole segment about a very expiring time aspect. And now it's also, instead of 40 minutes, it's 32. And there's a freshness to it. And so there's so many assets in your library. And wherever you are in your career, I want to encourage listeners that, man, once you're a year into it, there's usually gold sitting in your past content that could be reused, repackaged in some way. And it's usually a limiting belief that would stop you from republishing it. Even one quote unquote negative comment, oh, I think you already saw this before. Again, it's only one. Look at the likes. There's the other 99% of people who had never seen it, or were grateful because they forgot. And repetition is the father of learning and the mother of mastery. So hearing even great content again is not a bad thing. So if you're uploading 4 full-length episodes, let's talk a little bit about doing micro content. Do you do any kind of clips specifically on YouTube? And then do you do shorts or vertical across platforms? How are you now chopping it up and distributing the shows?
So once we finish the podcast, what I do is I'll take the SD cards out of the cameras, upload it into a Google Drive, all the files, and then now my video editor for YouTube has all the files. The audio also goes there too, and then the audio goes into a Dropbox for the sound engineer. So there's 2 different folders, one for the video edit, one for the audio edit. Now they have everything, and we date all the folders to let them know when these are going to be released. So they get to us at least 3 days before that. They use that as the calendar. And then once all the editing is done, that folder is shared with my social media team. So I have a social media manager and then an assistant, and they work together to get it on YouTube, Lipsyn, and all the platforms. But we get so much content from an hour episode and high quality, amazing clips. And you actually used a lot of the clips for our interview on your channels. And I saw a lot of them crush. It was super cool because it's HD, 3 different camera angles. Like, people love that. There's a different, you know this, Sean, you've done a lot of virtual, you've done a lot of in-person. What would you say, like, the difference? There's like an energy exchange that is so different in person. Would you say that's true?
Yeah. Well, not only there's energy, there's a connection with the guest, the audience feels it, but it also, the data backs it up. If possible, in-person interviews perform so much better. They translate better to all the micro content. And saying that, here we are. We've done many things in person together, and we're also doing something in virtual. So you got to do what you got to do. Not everybody lives in Miami or Vegas. Yeah. I'm now in the Pacific Northwest, a little bit more remote, and I don't have that. That's why I'm doing virtual. So you always, of course, can work with whatever you have. It's not about your resources. It's about your resourcefulness. But when possible, in-person interviews and collabs are unbeatable.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's cool that we have this technology to be able to be, I'm in Miami, you're in the Pacific Northwest, and you're in the cold, I'm in the nice weather here.
True.
Hit record. Yeah, so then once we have all that, then there's another step. I was using an agency based out of Canada. I've used them for a couple years. I won't name them, although they were great for me, but I was paying about $3,000 a month for like 30 clips, podcast clips, and it was adding up. And then, of course, now we have AI, and I came across this tool called Vidyo.AI, where you upload the full interview and then extracts as many clips as possible that it thinks were really relevant, cool clips, 60 seconds or less. And there's some editing involved. So my social media manager, Ada, goes in there and adds the titles. You see the titles, the camera's going back and forth. You do all that in the video. And it's just a monthly membership for a certain amount of minutes. And it's a lot less money. There's a little bit more work involved, but that's something I'm delegating. And at the end of the day, I'm saving a lot of more money doing it this way than hiring an agency. Now, the agency's edits were incredible. They were edits like you guys do on your Think Media podcast channel and TikTok and all that. Incredible edits. The ones we have now are not as high end as that. Yet they're still performing well and I'm saving a lot of money. So we'll get 15, 20, sometimes 30 clips from a single episode. Then that goes on YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, Facebook Personal Reels, Business Reels, Twitter, LinkedIn, all the channels, everything. And a lot of those have taken off. We've had a lot of clips go viral. It's been super cool to see that. So yeah, that's kind of the workflow of how it goes.
That's inspiring. And again, shows that with AI, it's kind of leveled the playing field, and that a pro like yourself has found that it's still reasonable, even at a pro level. It's more economical, the results, especially with education content as well. And I love your content. Certain hooks, it's the information, you want that to translate, and all the flash and overproduction's cool, but maybe not necessary. For those listening, Vidyo, I believe, is Vidyo.AI is VID, like YO.AI, something like that. And then another big option, people, if you haven't heard, is OpusClip. That's another one that are popular. Munch.ai are kind of these different tools, and tapping into those are so powerful and kind of levels the playing field. List out your team. I'm curious now, touch points that are involved. You hit it, but let's recap it. To get your video podcast done, who's all involved, all the way to the point of getting the YouTube Shorts uploaded and it distributed on Instagram as well?
Yeah, so I have a video editor who was I found on Fiverr, by the way, based out of Pakistan. He's been with me for over 2 years. He does all the video editing for the podcast interviews. Once that's done, that's given to Ada, my social media manager, who then uploads it to YouTube. She creates a thumbnail, she posts it, she creates the newsletter sent to our email list. She handles all that. She also does all the clips. And then once the clips are done, she gives that to Andrea, my personal assistant, who then posts it on social media with the exact title and hashtags that Ada gives to her and the scheduling timeline. And then the other person is going to be Ian, my podcast sound engineer, who does the audio. He gives that to us in a file, and then Ada also takes that file and puts it on Lipsyn for the audio podcast.
So if you're comfortable sharing a true approximation, but to run a video podcast at the level that you're at, 2 questions. How much do you think you've invested in gear and in the studio that, if you're watching the YouTube version of this, you can kind of see behind? It looks like there's sound panels on your wall. Is that true?
Yes, those are sound panels. Yeah.
So from the studio to doing a professional level studio podcast, what was the hard cost, which is fixed in the sense of you kind of pay it once and now you get to benefit from it? And then what would probably be roughly the monthly operations, understanding that you have a whole team and a business and other products and things you're fulfilling on. But if you were to give out a guess of what it costs to run your video podcast monthly, just roughly, what would you estimate?
So the cost of the studio and then the cost monthly is what you're asking.
Yep.
Okay. If I had to guess, because you should have asked me this earlier, Sean, I could have calculated it.
No worries, just approximation.
So approximately, I probably spent like $4,000 for the studio. I remember it was during Amazon Prime. I was using that day for sure. So
count cameras though and stuff, just to make sure. Cameras, lenses, roadcaster, sound, just like what it costs to set it all up.
Probably more, because the cameras are like $2,500. Yeah, more than, $2,500. The panel, probably close to $10K.
Okay.
$10K for the studio. One-time cost, right? One-time cost.
Yep.
And remind me to share something about one episode that made that all back. Remind me that. In terms of monthly costs, I'm spending, so the video editor, it's about $350 for the 3 camera angles for an hour. We're doing 8 a month. So that's $350 times 8. That's $2,800. And then Ada is probably like $800 a week. So that's 16. So yeah, I'm probably, and then Andrea and then Ian. So probably $5,500 to $6K a month for ongoing 2 episodes a week, video and audio.
If you're looking to get your first 1,000 subscribers or make your first $1,000 on YouTube, then join our free YouTube challenge that many other small creators have joined and seen tons of success. During this free challenge, Sean is going to share some of the best strategies for growing to your first 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, as well as making your first $1,000. Just go to tube1kchallenge.com or check the link down in the description.
As is the title of this very episode, we could start with just Zoom, a webcam, a USB mic, and distribute it yourself in maybe a $40 audio editor if you want that. And you could scale up to a pro level, pumping out insane volume and repurposing episodes, maybe 6K a month. And obviously you're attaching that on the back end of a business model that makes that sustainable. And we're years into this. And so I encourage people that you could see it's kind of brick by brick. How can we add a little bit more each month or figure some things out, improve it each month? Maybe one person doesn't work out or different things. Maybe you add an agency for an extra 3K, but boom, you brought that back. AI chops up the clips and a team member helps kind of work with that AI. So lots of different ways you could work it, but I think that's helpful for listeners for estimations.
Yeah. And can I add to that real quick?
Yeah.
Exactly. Like that's how much I'm spending now, but a couple things there, like I also have sponsors for my podcast, which is I'm getting that the sponsorships that we have is more than the monthly amount that I just gave you, right? So we're not even breaking even with that. We're making more with the sponsors. But in the beginning, I didn't have any sponsors. I think for the first 100 episodes, no sponsors. So what I actually did, this is something you teach a lot about, Sean. I was an affiliate for all these companies that I love and promote. So I would say on the podcast, even though they were not a sponsor, I would say this Keto Camp podcast episode is sponsored by Purity Coffee. Go to, and I would share the link. This is by Fresh Press Olive Oil Club, and I would share the link, even though it was just my affiliate link because I never had a sponsorship deal with them. But they wouldn't have anything against that. I'm promoting them, right? Eventually, as I grew, then I got the sponsorships, and now that's another income that comes in from the show.
I think that's a powerful tip. And if for listeners, one tweak on the language there, you could say is brought to you by, because if you're like, hey, this episode's brought to you by, it really is, because that affiliate is bringing you, and you are able to say, maybe it doesn't tie directly to the episode, but you're able to give that CTA, let people know about it in the show notes. That's a power tip right there. Tell us about the one episode that made the entire investment in your YouTube and video podcasting studio back.
Yeah, so it was one of the first video podcasts that we did. A gentleman named Dr. Nathan Bryan. He's a nitric oxide researcher. And I've interviewed him before virtually, and we became friends and big fan of his company and his research. And I let him know that I had this new studio and I'd love to interview him in Miami. And he actually visits Miami frequently, so it was easy to say yes. So he showed up. We recorded an hour episode. Actually, it was an hour and a half episode. And it was great. He got into the science. We had a great conversation. And then we promoted his supplements, which is these nitric oxide supplements. And I shared my affiliate link and my coupon code. And then we ended up releasing the podcast, and it got over 300,000 views on YouTube and a whole bunch on audio. And it did really well with affiliate sales, where they were out of stock for 2 weeks because we just sold them out for 2 weeks, which is a good problem to have. But with I'm still getting checks each month. They're actually sending me physical checks, which is funny, for each month for the affiliate sales. But it's made over the initial investment. Then that 1 hour and a half conversation, I got more than the money I spent for the studio, and the checks are still coming in from that one episode.
And 300,000 views on long form video. Can you guess what your highest earning singular YouTube video is?
In terms of the AdSense on YouTube?
Revenue.
I don't know. You would have to teach me how to do that, John.
So just affiliates. So not even thinking about the AdSense, one episode earned over $10,000, paid for your entire studio just from the affiliates. But then, of course, you're still using it. You're going to use it all this year, all next year, all next. And so it's not necessarily, and it wasn't episode one. You're saying it was the first episode of the video podcast with the Sony cameras,
yes,
with the
correct.
fancier gear.
Correct.
So you had built up your brand, you'd built up momentum, you'd built up relationships. But that's so encouraging, because we like to encourage our community. You're one video away from going viral. You're one video away from opening up a door to a relationship or a partnership. You're one video away from a video breaking out and earning $1,000 in ad revenue, 5K affiliates from a sponsor now paying attention to you. So much is waiting for you on the other side of taking action, starting messy and improving as you go. Okay, let's talk about reaching out to guests. And so you mentioned DMs, you mentioned some things. What would you say to those listening? Let's go day one, before you have influence, before your show has gotten bigger, before your YouTube channel, your audio podcast has grown. How do you reach out? How do you have the confidence? And what are some practical thoughts?
Yeah, in the beginning, it was all cold email or going to their website and using their contact form. And it was this pretty much the same template that I used for like the first 50 or 75. First of all, in the beginning, I identified the top 100 people I want to interview on my podcast before I even started the podcast. Then once I was ready to start interviewing, that's where I would go to their website. I would either find their email on their website, if not a contact form. And it was me. I did not have an assistant back then. I would just email them saying, hey, guest name, potential guest name. Big fan of your work. I love this book, and I would, be authentic. I read this specific book. Here's what I loved about it. I have this podcast, which is growing, and I would love to introduce your work in this book to my community who's hungry for this sort of knowledge. I would love to interview you for my podcast. It would be a 60-minute or less Zoom interview where we will record it and get it out to my community. Let me know if any of these dates work. This is before I had Calendly or anything like that. That would be easy to insert to make it easy for the guest. But before, I would just give them options. So I would put the options and they would reply, yeah, this works for me. Let's set it up. Here's my email. And then boom, we'd go from there. But now you could do things where add a Calendly link, have your schedule there, very easy to do. But that's what I did in the beginning. And now it's a little bit different with DMs and all that. But I was just cold emailing and contact forms for all these people. And here's the cool thing. If you just did the same thing, but you didn't mention the podcast, you said, I just want to hop on a Zoom call with you for an hour to have a conversation. I mean, the chances of them saying yeah are just decreased tremendously. But once you have a podcast and a community and they know you're going to promote their book, their work, it increases the chance substantially. So having a podcast is one of the best ways to build relationships and network people and have an hour conversation with somebody you admire, you've read their book. I mean, there's no cooler thing than that. I think it's awesome.
Who is probably the hardest to reach, perhaps biggest or most celebrity guest that surprised you, that you thought was kind of a moonshot that you've had on, or that it wasn't a relationship, but that you were able, because of exactly what you said, they said yes, and it kind of opened up a door?
Mark Sisson. Do you know who Mark Sisson is? Familiar with him? You're going to know who I am when I share who he is. Have you heard of Primal Kitchen Foods? Primal Kitchen, yeah. He's the founder of that. So he's the original, he's like the OG of metabolic flexibility, the paleo diet, Mark's Daily Apple, millions of views on his website. He's like one of the OGs, right? Okay. He sold Primal Kitchen to Heinz Corporation, but he still makes sure the formulation is good. So a lot of respect. He's just somebody I admired for so many years. And he actually moved from Malibu, California to South Beach several years ago. And I kept thinking, man, I'd love to connect with Mark, but he's, the stinking thinking comes in. He's not going to say yeah in person. He's going to be on bigger podcasts, not yours, Ben. But I said, I'm just going to message him on Instagram. If he says no or doesn't respond, whatever, I'm in the same place I was before. So I just messaged the guy on Instagram, not even knowing it was him that was going to see it, because sometimes they have a team. And I'm like, hey, Mark, big fan of your work. I'm the host of the Keto Camp podcast. I have a book called Keto Flex, which is, taking your work to my community. I have an in-person studio here in Miami. I know you're in Miami. I'd love to interview you in person. And I even said in there, please let me know how you could get in touch with Mark, an email or something like that. And he responded, hey, it's actually me. Here's my email. Let's set it up. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So I emailed him. And then 3 weeks later, he was in my studio, same one you came to, Sean. And we had an amazing conversation. And now we're talking through text message. We're about to have dinner. We're friends. It's I never would have expected this. This is a guy that I had put on a pedestal. And it was as simple as just messaging him on Instagram when I had thought about doing that for over a year and I procrastinated. So that's the first person that came to mind.
I want to encourage listeners. It reminds me of a previous project that I was doing with my friend Benji called Video Influencers. Our first guest, or a very early guest, Shalene Johnson, was a cold Twitter, now X, reach out. And it led to her welcoming me into her fitness studio and filming an in-person interview with her, again, as a fitness celebrity and New York Times bestselling author, and with a show that was barely off the ground. Now, when I say barely, I think we might have had 1,500 subscribers or 2,200, but not super established and not even a huge track record. Again, like, which is one of the most helpful things, I think. What can you show to others? Can you show them influence? Can you show them track record? Sometimes if I get an invite and someone's only on episode 3, it's like, well, I don't know if they're going to be consistent with this. Hey, reach out again once you're on episode 30 or 50, just because of the track record, like build up the brand a little bit, build up the momentum. But regardless, it never hurts to ask. You actually lose nothing if they say no, but you could gain a lot if they say yes. And so that's very inspiring. And we can always think about, I like making a dream 50 list or a dream 100 list, a Google Doc, a Google Sheets, an Excel spreadsheet, and just plugging people in. And maybe 49 of them say no the first year and the second year, but someone says yes. And then you circle back and then more start saying yes as you grow. Let's talk about interviewing. You mentioned being awkward at the start. That's where we all are. It could be rough, timing. What do I say? Am I doing a good job? Then we say dumb stuff. We stumble over our words. And it's a hard skill to master. But what have you learned about interviewing, about preparation, about asking questions now that you're over 700 episodes?
It's a great question, Sean. I'm also on a lot of podcasts like this one, right? I'm always a guest on a lot of podcasts. I'm also the person hosting it as well. And I could always tell as a guest when I show up and I'm interviewed if the host has not done their research on me and they're just kind of winging it. Definitely that's not the case here, Sean. You always do your research and you also know we know each other personally. But in general, like when I hop on, and I don't like that as a guest, I feel like they should have done the research. And I feel that way, not in an ego way, but because I'm a host and for every single one of my guests, I make sure I research them before I interview them. I study them. I have what I want to talk about. I never wing it. Never. That's not my style. Now, some people like to do that and they think it's an organic conversation. I think that's an excuse. It could still be an organic conversation. You just don't tell the guest what you're going to talk about. I mean, you shared a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. I don't really like to do that personally as the host. I just don't give away anything. I just let them know that I want to keep it organic and let it be fresh. So that's the way I go about it as a podcast host. I read their book. I have bullet points I want to hit. And it's always a good conversation when I have, let's say, 10 or 15 bullet points, but I only get to 5 because we went so deep on a few. And those are always the best ones versus like running out of bullet points that I want to get to. The conversations that are difficult, and I've done over 700, but let's say like some of them are repeat, some of them are solo. So let's say 500 different people to kind of be conservative. So 500 different people I've interviewed, and the ones that are tough are the guests that give me short answers. When I expect like a 10-minute answer and they're done in 2 minutes, I'm like, oh, so my responsibility as a guest is to extract more from them on that specific topic, that specific question before going to the next one. Because I think as a listener, it's better to go deep into a few things than be spread out to so many different things. At least as for me, when I'm listening to podcasts, I like to go deep. So I like to do that as the host, and I take it really serious. It's not a hobby. This is this is my job. I look at it as such. So that's the way I go about it, Sean.
Do you have any intentional goals? What's a good podcast for you? Like, what's a good conversation? And then what's maybe ones you've learned from, you mentioned short answers, that wasn't as good? Like, what does winning look like for you at the end of the conversation?
Winning looks like, the main bullet points that I wanted to hit, we hit and we went deep, and we shared it in a way that, we got to the science because we're a nutrition and health podcast, but we also shared it in a way that if you don't understand the science, you're going to get it. Because, what's challenging in my space, Sean, and I'm sure it's your space too. There's things that are really comprehensive, like the algorithms and different things, and for nutrition and the science, and we understand these things. And it's really, what is it called, like kitchen table talk, right? I think you say we want to make sure we could share these things at the kitchen table for somebody to understand it right easily, like a 16-year-old, a third grader to understand the concepts. Otherwise, it just goes right over their head. So a successful podcast would be getting to the science, but also sharing analogies and sharing the practical use of it. And I feel like the audience gets it versus, oh my gosh, that was just too deep. Everybody's lost unless you're a scientist who listens to the show. Losing, or I don't know if I would use the word losing, but a podcast that didn't perform as well would be a podcast that somebody was just pushing their products or pushing an agenda. They were answering the questions in a 2-minute answer instead of a long answer. And I didn't really extract what I wanted to extract from them. And I take responsibility when it comes to that. But I have a question for you, Sean, if you don't mind me asking real quick.
Go for it.
Have you ever recorded a podcast and not released it? And if so, you don't have to say why, who, but why?
Yes. And the reason why was there was so much dissonance between the guest and the audience, even though I did tell them who the audience was. Meaning, one of my favorite tips we say the creator who understands the viewer best wins. And I think our responsibility is to, I deeply love this Think Media podcast community. I know there's such a diverse group of people here, whether beginners, intermediate, advanced, or whether more creator leaning or more business owner leaning. But I want to fight for, if you say something that might bring confusion, let me explain what that is, if possible. Let me connect those dots. And so it just kind of felt like this person was just sort of talking, but not really connecting. That wasn't the main reason, but that was a reason. Two, it was a little bit selly, a little bit like not, I would say our spirit at the Think Media podcast. We know that to sell is to serve, and that if your product can change lives, it's your ethical duty to get it out there. But we're anti-car salesman, anti-manipulation, all that kind of stuff. And so it was kind of old school, and that didn't fully fit the vibe. But then the biggest thing was it was tied into an actual product that, as we continue to research deeper, I didn't feel like we could actually get behind that product. As it was software, and thinking about the other alternatives, we're not perfect, but we wanted to guard what we recommend. We know there are more than one option, but where I saw like the roadmap for that software not really going anywhere, and that has what has panned out. So I just wanted to be cautious about not, putting that out there and letting our community take our trust, or the trust we've built, and get into something that would possibly let them down later. And I felt that might have been the case. So I just thought, man, all things added together, was because you might say, hey, if you want to check out their stuff, there's a link in the description. But I thought, man, that considered the overall vibe, the kind of dissonance, and it just not, I like to score things on a scale from 1 to 10. Like a 10 out of 10 episode would be not, you're never going to be perfect, but it would be like, man, the vibe was good. The information was good. It would feel like their spirit, their character, the whole thing, that was all great. The product that we promote is one of the best products. I couldn't be more excited about it. I would get behind it. That'd be a 10 out of 10. And if it dropped below, I don't know, a 7, that maybe a 6, to me, this probably hit like a 2.5 or a 3. And I was like, man, we can't put that out. Would we put out a 6.5? Okay, it's not gonna be our best episode. Not my favorite. But I also only have one vantage point. I think my discernment as the person making the final decision here is so important. However, my process with anybody else, if you will, on the team, what were your thoughts? Oh, I didn't quite feel it was that bad. Okay, fair enough. So maybe let's raise it up. It's about a 7. It's not gonna be our best episode or our favorite thing, but it isn't disaligned with these things that we value. Great, let's put it out there. Its score was more like a 2.5. And it was like, man, I think we actually, it's not even neutral if we were to post this episode. It just would be almost negative. And so we left that one on the cutting room floor.
Respect. Yeah, I respect that. I think your audience listening to this, your answer also respects that. I get it.
I appreciate the question as well. And again, always trying to navigate as we go forward is we just had a meeting today about, these were the 3 questions, a great question to audit every aspect of life and business. What do we need to start? What do we need to stop? What should we continue? What are we missing out? What segments or shows or clips could we add? What is over the last year if we just didn't do that this year? And that was, with no disrespect to any guest, that was auditing certain topics. We were wondering like how far we're a YouTube promise podcast, unfiltered YouTube tips for building a profitable channel. But we've at certain times had TikTok on and Facebook on, different experts, because we are video as well, and YouTube content creators and business owners leveraging video. You're distributing across platforms. We're on all platforms. So how deeply do we go into those? So we always want to be asking hard questions about which episodes are a little fringy. I'm sharing some stuff about my story more. And I'm like, are those unfiltered YouTube tips for building a profitable channel? But also realizing the guests, is a certain percentage of, well, what's your background? How did you become you? What about mindset? So there's a lot of questions to wrestle with. And anyways, I'm grateful that you asked that. And that very conversation came up today to think about how can we always do better every year for the listener, which is who we care about the most, that this show would be truly valuable. My next question for you is, I saw you do some hooks. And by hooks, I mean, I clicked on an episode and it was like, boom, and it had some B-roll and it had some music and it had some highlights from the episode. And that's a far cry from just uploading Zoom straight through. Not every episode, but we're starting to do that now. And it takes quite a bit more energy to where some of them are outrageous. We had Patrick Bet-David on. There's clips of the government. There's clips of all kind, news clip. Like, it depends on how much energy you put in them. When did you start doing those? And have you noticed what inspired you to have, by hooks, I mean kind of like custom video intros that really are like a teaser trailer leading right into the podcast? When did you do your first one and how do you get those done?
Yeah. We've been doing the 90-second video intro clips that shares a little bit about the conversation in a very dramatic way. Actually, I think I got that from, I know who I got it from, but I think it was through either you or Nolan or somebody from Think Media who shared about a channel making these clips, the Diary of a CEO channel, making these clips. And we looked at what they were doing. I think it's because of you guys put that on my radar. And then I told my video editor, hey, let's do what they're doing. Just model that. So yeah, we started doing that. Some videos take off with that. Some videos don't do as good as I want them to. But my channel is really interesting, the YouTube channel, because we have certain topics that we get into that YouTube doesn't like sometimes. Unfortunately, this is the day we live in. And some videos get these flags. Whenever that happens, like, everything just slows down and then we have to wait for it to pick up. Like, there was a video, I don't know if you know this about, you probably know this because you know everything about YouTube, but there was a video we did. I'm not going to talk about the specific thing we spoke about, but YouTube sent a warning to us. They took the video down and said, your account is under probation until the end of December of last year. And if you have this happen again, we're going to terminate your account. And I submitted an appeal, submitted all the studies to back up what we said. And they were really good studies and they denied the appeal. And they made me do this digital re-education concentration camp. This is not a lie.
No way.
Where in order to get my account back open, I had to answer 12 questions. And I did not agree with the questions, but I had to agree to the questions in order for me to get my account back. But ever since that happened, the account slowed down and then it picked up. So it's really weird, some of the things that happens with our specific channel. I know this is a long answer to your question, but that's some of the things we've seen recently. It's been wild, dude.
Well, that's, it brings up this topic of shadow banning. And I know we've touched on this. I think some people take it to the extreme. I think some people denying that it exists. It does exist as well. I want to clarify two things. One, you mentioned though before that if it triggered something in terms of the subject matter, you felt the whole channel slow down a little bit after that?
Yeah, I did.
So that it's like I was almost throttled down in terms of your distribution.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's also, Sean, the biggest keto YouTuber, Dr. Eric Berg. He's got over 11 million YouTube subscribers. He actually emailed me a few months ago. I didn't even think it was him. I thought it was, I've never interviewed him or connected with him before. And he's like, hey, it's Dr. Berg. I love your work. I'd love to talk to you about something. My assistant forwarded it to me and she goes, I think it's spam. And I said, I think it's spam too, but ask him about his availability. And he said he's available at this time. We sent him a Zoom link and I'm on the Zoom like, am I getting catfished? Who's going to show up on the Zoom call? But I'm waiting there and it actually was him. So we had a great conversation. I didn't even knew he was a big fan of my work. I'm a big fan of his. But what he told me is that in May of last year, his YouTube channel went from getting on average 100 million views per month to 25 million views per month. And he would rank for all the keto terms, keto, Dr. Berg, keto this, Dr. Berg. All that's gone. And all that's showing up now are these different like Mayo Clinic things talking negative about keto. And there's a big pushback against keto right now. And here's the reason why we think it is because there's a big, and I don't want to get off topic here, but there's an agenda for a plant-based diet, and keto goes against that. And they're really coming after keto. You can see these vegan documentaries coming out. So his channel is getting throttled like crazy. And I'm just a small sliver of that because my channel is not as big as his, but he's seeing it too, Sean. And he's really concerned about what's happening there.
So I'm curious for somebody who's maybe feeling like they're getting shadow banned, somebody that's dealing with subject matter that the higher ups, the big corporations, Google parent company, whatever. For somebody that is dealing with that, have you considered premium only content, channel membership only, or like a separate only content, and realizing that maybe just some subject matter could go elsewhere? What are your thoughts? How are you reacting to that? To think about, I still want to leverage the distribution. I still want to leverage impacting people. I still want to change lives. Ignoring YouTube, I don't think is the answer, because for all of the above reasons. But what do you do? What's your plan this year going forward?
Yeah, we actually so definitely not ignoring YouTube. YouTube is the play. Don't get me wrong here. I agree with Sean. Like, YouTube is the play. And we understand that. We understand how powerful YouTube is, how powerful YouTube will be. Saving all my content is what I'm doing. We have everything on different drives just in case. So making sure we save everything. But we are getting creative on YouTube. So that same guest that I had in the summer that our video got taken down, that video was going viral too before it got taken down. We brought him back, but I said we have to use keywords. So I guess I could share. I mean, I'll share the keywords, and I think your audience will know what I meant by it. So instead of using the actual word that got us banned, we use the words safe and effective choice. I think your audience gets it. Instead of using a certain word, we use the word toxic protein. I think your audience gets that too. So we just got creative, and we did another conversation, and that video has over 244,000 views now in the last month or so, and we just didn't use those words that YouTube doesn't like. So that's what we're doing. We're just getting creative with the way we say things.
It's interesting. My friend Ruslan, who creates faith-based content, will talk about a lot of subject matter that, again, media, kind of mainstream media, might get throttled or shadow banned. There's definitely that opportunity to just use different words, and your audience can get it. And that's interesting. I also think, the example being Candace Owens interviewed Andrew Tate, a very polarizing and long form conversation. But there were moments where it kind of blurred out them, and some text came out that said, if you want to see the full uncut conversation, it's available on Daily Wire Plus, which, not that tactically should just be a money-making play, but I think that's an interesting thought. People who are your super fans that are really resonating with you will, I think, want to support the movement. They want to support the message. They want to support what's happening. Two, you give a legitimate reason of why a paywall exists. And then three, you do take the conversation off platform. JP Sears, conservative comedian, and also is active on Rumble, and then of course building his newsletter. And I think your tip about backing up your content and diversifying your platforms could be really is incredibly powerful. Some people also Ruslan will have full conversation on Patreon because, again, many different reasons you could do it. All said under the wrapper and the umbrella of quoting you. YouTube is the play. So I think some people, I understand this gets emotional, censorship, free speech. Gets emotional, but I think the wise evaluate the landscape, evaluate the chessboard, and then just make strategic moves. And I think there's a world where that you just, what are the rules of the game, and learn how to play the rules of the game. We could get overly romantic about wishing they were different or arguing over whether the rules are ethical or right. We could argue all day. Let's learn how to play chess. And there's some really insightful thoughts that you have there. As we kind of land the plane, I want to touch on monetization. You mentioned you've had some sponsors that you've brought on. Early on, you were doing affiliates, and we'll have to have you back on for another episode because you've built a great membership community. So without going into maybe the verticals of all the different things in your business, monetizing a video podcast, though, for you, why does this whole thing make sense economically? How do you raise money for the mission that you could directly correlate to your video podcast? What are the different monetization streams?
There's a lot of ways. Of course, as the YouTube videos gets views, you have the AdSense that you get from YouTube. It's a small chunk there, but it's something. But then you have the podcast sponsors. So I have sponsors for my audio Keto Camp podcast, and I have different sponsors for my Keto Camp YouTube podcast. So keep that in mind. And some of them are on both, and they just pay more, right? So if you do both, that's more ways to get more income from the sponsors. And of course, these are sponsors that I love. I use these products, I've researched them, and I promote them because I trust them and what they have to offer. I would not promote something that I don't believe in. That's one way. And then I have, when I interview guests, and if they have a product or a course, or if they have something that has an affiliate program attached to it, we always get that sorted before we hit record. So when we talk about whatever the science of their product, their course, or whatever it is, and what I share is my affiliate link or the coupon code, and that's another way to bring in income. And that does really well, really, really well. Like the example with the nitric oxide one, but there's also other companies that see what I'm doing. And for example, you get a lot of free stuff as a podcast host, which is super cool. So I have people send me cool stuff. Like this company's called Lila Quantum. This is actually, sounds woo-woo, but this has quantum energy, and it harmonizes EMFs. They actually have studies that show they have this quantum block that helps with the EMFs and the Wi-Fi, but it also thins your blood. And they showed in these live blood analysis tests, and I know I'm getting a little off track here, but this is super cool to share real quick, that when blood is exposed to Wi-Fi, it makes it clot, thick blood. And when you put in your hands in their product called the Lila Quantum Infinity Block for 10 minutes and then take the same blood analysis, the blood becomes thin again. Really cool, right? They have studies to back that up. They sent me this Lila Quantum Infinity Block, these EMF blocking boxers, this chain, and I went on their website, and everything they sent me was like about $4,000. And I thought, that is incredible. And that's because I have a podcast. So I say that because there's financial income. There's also income you get, not income, but free stuff you get. But then the relationships, and there's just so many cool things. And we're not going to get into where we could drive them to like free guides and webinars and trainings and courses and all that. But there's so much you can do with it.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense. And actually, it does. That does sound woo-woo, but you pique my interest. You're like my go-to kind of biohacking expert, and so many things that you have shared with me have truly transformed my life. And I'm a huge proponent of red light therapy and NAD plus and all of these different things. So that is inspiring. And I think that's a dream for a lot of listeners. Just, man, how could I take what I'm passionate about, the thing that I would research and study anyways, the thing that I want to interview my heroes. I want to know more about this, and I would do it for free. But man, if I could get free stuff, do it make a living off it, even make, significant wealth off of it, and while changing people's lives, it's the ultimate dream. And I think that video podcasting is only going to continue to grow. The stats are off the charts, and YouTube's ingesting RSS feeds now. That's a whole new update. Like there's an integration there. We're still processing because we already run that separately. But if you actually do a YouTube first feed, YouTube can now send basically the audio as an RSS feed to the other platforms. I'm not sure all the details. That's brand new. Like as we were recording, of course, Google is going away and becoming YouTube Music, and YouTube Music's making that play to be more like Spotify. So Google Podcast, I think, is becoming YouTube Music, and the frontier of video podcasts, audio podcasts is massive. And so this has really been a masterclass that you've been sharing here. And Ben, I'm so grateful for you. I want you to do a shout out where people can follow you. And we'll, of course, link everything up in the show notes and anything else that you think would add value to our community.
Yeah, well, I have the Keto Camp podcast, and Sean was on there. I've had over 700 episodes, so you could find that on any podcast platform and also YouTube, obviously. And my website is benazadi.com. So if you want to learn more about what I teach, keto, fasting, biohacking, longevity, all the cool things, it's benazadi.com.
And Think Media Podcast listeners, if you're on the YouTube version, please drop in the comments a future guest you'd want to hear. Show some love to Ben. Any questions or feedback that you have for us, audio, rate, review, and share the podcast. I know you hear this kind of like every week, but it really does mean the world. If you could share it out, maybe there's somebody you think this episode would benefit from. We were just looking at our Spotify ratings. You can't even review there, but you can just quickly go in, give it a star rating. If you listen on Spotify, it would mean the world. Show some love or wherever. And I want to thank you, Think Video Podcast. This is all for you. My name is Sean Cannell, helping you build a profitable YouTube channel. And we will connect in a future episode.